Somebody unmute themselves and let me know. Can you see the screen okay? Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Off we go. So, welcome to the Amduat, or Book of the Hidden Chamber. The Book of the Dead, more properly the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or Pert Emhru, was for anyone, at least anyone who could afford it. The Amduat, however, was reserved for kings and high priests. It describes the journey of the deceased pharaoh through the underworld, identified not only with Osiris, or Asar, but also with the journey of the sun through the hours of the night to dawn. Thus, the dangers faced by the sun during the night mirror the dangers faced by the dead king as he struggles against enemies to reintegrate himself on his journey toward rebirth. Just as the sun, quote unquote, dies in the west and must make the perilous journey through the night country to be reborn in the east, so too must the deceased pass through the hidden chamber, the immense city of the Netherworld, the land of the dead, and vanquish his foes with the help of his spiritual guardians. The journey is divided into 12 hours, each separated from the next by great gates and guarded by sentries, the dwellers on the thresholds. The deceased must address each one by name, for their names are themselves the keys to the gates. Each is one of our fears, the one who loves to cut off heads, the one who sprays fire with his eye, and so on. This is the terrible journey, the fearful narrow passageway of the Tibetan Bardo, the harrowing of hell, Dante's descent into and rebirth from the infernal regions, which we, as kings and queens of our own destinies, must overcome if we are to be reborn. A brief self-introduction, beginning with who I am not. Although I am a history professor, I am not an Egyptologist. And although I am interested in the great work of self-transformation, and I'm fascinated by depth psychology, I do not have any training in psychology. So what I'm presenting here is purely as an amateur. I've got my email and my Discord contact here in case you guys want to ping me later on.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, brother. Real quick, is it possible, because what we're seeing is like preview tiles on the left.
Really?
If you full screen
it should be full screen. Let me try again. I'm going to turn it off and turn it back on.
It's definitely full screen for me. Just letting you guys know. I've got a perfect view.
Really?
Yeah, it's just the settings you put on your own system.
I just seen the avatar. I'm on my phone.
Yeah, it should be the full thing.
Okay, yeah, now it looks good.
Click the person. Click
okay. All right. Except that it jumped a page. Right.
Unpin yourself. That's all.
We good?
All right. Muting.
All right. So many writers have addressed the process of self-transformation or self-actualization in a variety of formulas. The simplest outline is a single-step process. Let go and let God. This is encountered in a variety of religions, from the Bhakti Yoga of Hinduism, the surrender to Christ in Christianity, the relaxing into awareness of emptiness in Buddhism, and even the inflame thyself by prayer of contemporary mysticism. Other formulas vary from the simple to the complex. For example, the solve and coagula, to dissolve and then reintegrate. The seeker breaks down the portions of her life that need to be changed in order to rebuild a new and better life. This is the tearing down of a rickety or haphazard structure, which is then replaced with a more sound edifice. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the joke about join the OTO and have your life explode. Another is the EIO formula. Okay, somebody's not on mute. Please be sure to mute your mic. Thank you. Another is the EIO formula. Although it uses the names of the Egyptian deities, Isis, Apophis, and Osiris, this is a modern development, not an ancient Egyptian formula. Sorry to shock you. And although it can also be related to the Neoplatonist deity known to the Gnostics as EIO, the concept here is that of a tripartite journey. First is the phase symbolized by the nurturing goddess Isis, the eye of the EIO. The beginning of a spiritual undertaking is at first enjoyable, a honeymoon period, if you will. As one goes on, however, things become more difficult. What was fun becomes hard work. Boredom or frustration may set in. Doubts begin to cloud the way. This is the apophis phase through which the adherent must persevere if he or she is to reach the goal, a chrysalis stage, if you will. We're going to see this again as we go through the Amduat. And finally, there is a breakthrough, and the seeker is reborn. The work is no longer work. The transformation has taken place. This is symbolized by the god who dies and is reborn, Osiris. This three-stage formula is similar to Jung's three-step outline, to which he gave the terms nigredo, or blackness, albedo, or whiteness, and rubedo, or redness, drawing upon medieval alchemy. Note, however, that his version skips the Isis stage and corresponds to the Apophis and Osiris stages, with the dawning or transition from A to O as the albedo. Then there's the alchemical seven-step outline as described by Jung and his followers like Hauck, Hillman, and others. This too is a formula that draws upon medieval alchemy in order to describe a journey of self-transformation. While this is not the time to go into an analysis of spiritual versus practical alchemy, we can see how the various steps of the process are derived from their alchemical analogs. Calcination, or burning off of the dross. Dissolution, learning to let go. Separation, or identifying the essential parts and distinguishing what is to be retained and what we must let go of. Conjunction. This is the key point in the process, where the parts of ourselves which must be discarded are jettisoned, and the true self is integrated into wholeness. Fermentation. The fire in the soul, when the magical child created by the union of self and soul in the previous stage is nurtured and grows, leaves behind its material existence and is transformed into spiritual substance. Distillation, or consecration, where the reborn adept becomes joined to and infused with their higher spiritual forces. And finally, coagulation, the manifestation of the philosopher's stone. The process is complete. The transformed individual has become fully self-actualized. There are other systems as well, of course, but I mention these in the slight detail, not only because you may find them of interest for your own further research, but also because we will see echoes, or rather foreshadowings, if you will, of these schemas in the discussion of the Amduat as we move through its stages. So, the Amduat. Book of the Hidden Chamber. It's based on a 24-hour division of time that the ancient Egyptians learned from the Sumerians and Babylonians. And so it uses a 12-step process, one for each hour of the sun's journey from sunset to dawn. Although it will not map exactly on any of the systems just mentioned, and is a religious mystical text rather than having been intended as a psychological guide, it nevertheless does describe a process of transformation. Just as the sun dies in the west and is reborn in the east, so too the king dies to the material world and is reborn in a purified state. So too may we, kings and queens of our own destinies, die to our old states and be reborn, purified, with purpose renewed. It is a quest that will require us to call upon our ability to withstand the rigors of purification, as well as our dedication, our reserves of fearlessness, our capacities for self-reflection and self-discipline. We will need a fair amount of mental and emotional stability and the wisdom to know when to call upon other resources, a guide, an advisor or counselor, or even professional assistance in our journey of self-transformation. Israel Regardie famously said that anyone wanting to become a magician, that is, someone who undertakes the journey of self-mastery, should also get psychotherapy. Why? Because it's damned hard work, and it helps to have guidance along the way. But the prize will be our freedom to move as we will upon the face of the earth, as the Book of the Dead puts it. And with that, let's turn to our book. The original title was The Book of the Hidden Chamber. It was also known as the Amduat, or That Which is in the Netherworld. It is said that, quote, "It is good for the dead to have this knowledge, but also for a person on earth, it is a remedy 1,000,000 times proven. Whoever knows these images becomes himself the image of the great God." It was first seen in the New Kingdom period around 1470 BCE. Originally, it was inscribed on the walls of the pharaoh's burial chamber, the best known version being in the tomb of Thutmose III, and that of his wazir, Useramun. It was also found in the tombs of his son, Amenhotep II, and of Amenhotep III, father of the famous quote-unquote heretic Akhenaten, perhaps the first monotheist. The tomb of Akhenaten's equally famous son, Tutankhamun, also uses an excerpt from the book, as do the tombs of Ramses VI, the ninth, and others. By the end of the New Kingdom period, around 1000 BCE, its use was no longer restricted to only pharaohs and their wazirs, but began to spread to the priests as well. It remained in use into the Ptolemaic and even up into the Roman period, a span of more than a millennium and a half, equal to the length of time from the fall of Rome until now. The images in the hours in this presentation are generally taken from the tomb of Thutmose III. My primary source for this presentation is Obden Horning's Knowledge for the Afterlife, published by Living Human Heritage Publications in Zurich, Switzerland, 2003. Another good source of information is The Sun God's Journey Through the Netherworld by Andreas Schweitzer. In the earlier periods, it was carved on the walls of the king's burial chamber, ideally beginning in the west and ending in the east. I'm going to show you this because it plays a part later. Note that this picture is a bit confusing at first, since the orientation is reversed from our normal expectations. Here, north is at the bottom, east is on the left, and so on. So there's the orientation that we'd more familiar with. There are some variations in the actual layouts in different tombs, depending on space limitations, where the doors are located, and so on. Later, the book was inscribed on the sarcophagus, try that 10 times fast, itself, or written on papyrus and placed next to the body within the sarcophagus. Around the time of Akhenaten's heresy, there's also a switch from cursive hieroglyphs to the standardized hieroglyphs. There are also some passages in archaic or little used hieroglyphs, perhaps for emphasis the way we might use Latin or Greek today. Each hour follows the same general layout, beginning with an introduction and vertical columns symbolizing the gateway, with the names of the hour, the name of the gate, and the region of the underworld, and a general admonition to learn and know these. Then the main body of each hour is in 3 registers or rows. The middle row always begins with the solar bark and depicts the main subject of the region. By the way, these are generally all read left to right, unlike the Semitic writing of the Hebrews, Arabs, and others later on. In case you're counting, there are a total of 908 beings in the book. There's your 8 and 90. For each of the hours, I will show the image of the hour, followed by the schematic of that image, and then some details. If I'm going too fast at any point, unmute your mic, let me know to slow down, and then please remute yourself. All right, here we go. The first hour is an intermediary land, equivalent to Twilight, limbo. It shows the gate that swallows all, i.e. the actual entrance to the land of the dead. Through me is the way into the woeful city, as Dante put it. It may be read as the decision to set forth on the quest, the decision to begin the great work of self-transformation. The pharaoh is Re. You know him as Ra due to a misreading of Budge from the 19th century on. Or as we say, Re, when somebody asks if you are a god, say yes. By following the journey of the sun god, the pharaoh gains the god's immortality. He does this for all mankind. Thus, he is the redeemer, the savior, the bodhisattva, the messiah. His ship, the solar bark, sails to the Western Isles. It goes into the great darkness, the land where stability exists not, and it will be brought safely again from darkness into light to live again in the sun. His guide is Mat, truth, order, dharma, te. Another boat shows him as Khepra. Even here at the beginning, we see a foreshadowing, a foreshowing of his resurrection in the end, since Khepra is the god whose name means transformation, renewal, rebirth. The king is met by a group of 9 baboons, sacred symbols or agents of Tahuti, who greet him with song and open the gates for him. They are said to communicate with Re in a secret tongue that the living cannot understand. Only the dead and the gods know it. Also there to greet him are 12 goddesses of the hours of the night. All of them are aspects of Hathor, Heru, whose name means the house of Horus. Hathor, by the way, is sometimes identified with Aphrodite and Venus, and thus by extension could be considered one aspect of Babylon. Their task is to reveal the secret names of the night hours to the king, and they themselves have names reflecting their duties. The wise one who protects the master, the one who repels the gang of Set, the starry one, and so on. And finally, 12 Uraeus serpents greet him, their fiery breath defending him from his enemies. Like the king, our journey of self-transformation begins with the first step, as Kung Fu said. Whether it's a conscious decision to set out on the path or one forced upon us by circumstances, the only way to begin is to begin. It's popular now to disparage Joseph Campbell, but we can say that our own hero's journey starts here. The second hour is the beginning of the actual underworld. We sail on the solar bark to the region known as the fertile fields. Around us, we see a myriad of other boats like ours, each bearing someone recently deceased. On the shores, farmers harvest the grain fields. This is the Isis phase of the Iao formula, a time when the great work is still enjoyable, perhaps even easy. We see, too, that others are on the same journey as us. We are now in the Netherworld proper, a marshy, fertile region fed by the Nun, or primeval ocean, the sea of possibilities. Other boats cluster around us with provisions for the journey. Our boat, the last, brings the moon, the feather of Mat, and a god with no name. He is no one, he is everyone who carries the truth. Just as the beings in this region give to the God King, he gives to them. They bring him gifts, first fruits, to sustain him. As their king, his duty to them is to give them their duties according to their roles. They are the gods of the seasons, who make a present to this great God with the seasons. They praise him with the years in their hands. This great God gives orders to them. They cry to him, and they live from his voice. Their throats breathe when he calls them. He assigns them their functions and gives them the plants of the fields. Likewise, we seekers after hidden wisdom must take stock of our resources, feed those that further us on our journey, and be fed by them in return. In the third hour, we see more watery fields, but the light is fading quickly as we go deeper into the other world. There are no fields of grain to be seen. We are in a wilderness of reed marshes. Our helplessness increases, and our guardians bear knives to ward off the fiends who begin to threaten us. The sounds of lamentation increase, distant wailings coming to us through the gloom. We speak with the few inhabitants we encounter, though we hardly see them now. Carried along by the flowing waters, our entourage passes the shore dwellers, whose duty it is to make the annual flood of the Nile to flow. The flood here, like that of the earthly Nile, erases the boundaries between all things for a time, and floods the land with fertility. At this point, anything which we will may be born. Difficulties are beginning to arise. The life-giving waters are still abundant, though, and we are protected by our guardians, that is, by the practices by means of which we have developed our will's expression. At this time, it is vitally important to make best use of rituals, affirmations, and all the skills through which we learn to turn away bad habits and develop new ones through force of will. Addressed by the gods of the hour as the interpreter or translator of the Netherworld, the God King responds by giving them fields of food, air, water, and light. Just so must we encourage those portions of ourselves that strengthen our resolve as they ward off the doubts and the distractions that bedevil us on our path. And now we begin the most perilous regions of our journey. After the inundation of the previous hour, we find ourselves in a dry spell, the barren deserts of impenetrable gloom and smothering silence. Others will later speak of this dryness that besets the adherent, St. John of the Cross, the mystic fraternities of Martinism, the Golden Dawn, OTO, and AA. We have begun the Apophis phase of the Iao formula. The next hours will be the most dangerous we will ever face. Entering the fourth hour, we have come to the desert of Rosetau, or Restau, in Budge's translation. The river on which we were traveling has become a barren land full of swift and treacherous serpents, some shown here with legs and wings, and the other boats have all been turned back, We alone are strong and righteous enough to go on. The land is full of whirlwinds of fire. Our path has become a zigzag, repeatedly blocked by doors which we must unlock to pass through. Our bark has to be towed and has itself become a great serpent with fiery breath to pierce the gloom and ward off enemies. We can no longer see our guardians through the murk, only the occasional glow of the enemies with fire-spitting serpents who threaten us. The God King travels through the gloom, his way lit by the flaming breath of the serpent into which his bark is transformed. By the power of his voice, the king rouses his companions, those who have succumbed to the sleep of death, the river of Letha, of oblivion. They cannot see each other. They make no response to his call. All he can do is utter his word, his logos, in hopes that it will revive and inspire them. We are now in the dark night of the soul. What was sweet in the mouth has become bitter in the belly. What previously came easily has become hard work. What was enjoyable before is now painful drudgery. The very thought of continuing fills us with dread. Nevertheless, we must not quit now or all will be lost. We must persevere unto the end. To stop now would mean to become neither that which we were, nor that which we will to become. It would be a denial of Eheya. Ibis-headed Jehuti and falcon-headed Sokar spend the hour protecting the Ujat, the solar eye, temporarily blinded by the powers of darkness. Although the vision of our purpose has been obscured, it has not been lost, protected by our logical mind rather than our dark emotions, and by the forward momentum of our will. Near the end of this region, 4 life-giving deities appear, carrying the Ankh, the symbol of eternal life. One is identified as Onuris, he who brings the distant goddess, and the sky suddenly splits momentarily to reveal the heavens. Even in the darkest night, our star still guides us on, if we but look up to see it. In the 5th hour, the gloomy desert continues. We have reached the western lands. Our solar bark is a double-headed serpent that glides across burning desert. Utter darkness is all around us. In the center of the region is a burial mound with 2 birds of lamentation. They are Isis and Nephthys. We must pass into and through it, emerging as the great scarab. Thus the barrow is also a dunghill, since Kefra is also the dung beetle. We have arrived at the point where the old self must die, yet the will must survive. Butchers and serpents threaten us on either side. 7 male and 7 female deities pull the tow rope, aided from above by Kefra. We pass into the cavern of Sokar, inside the double-facing Aker Sphinx, or Sphinx of the 2 horizons, also known as Ruti, or 2 lions. And don't forget the Rahur Huit Re Harakte means ray of the 2 horizons. This is a land where opposites meet, where 2 is equilibrated to become 0, the tomb of the earth and the primordial sea, the pyramid of death and the water of life. And remember, the pyramid and pyre have the same root. This is the fulcrum, the balance point between old and new. It is with the transition to the 5th hour that we move from the western wall of the tomb to the south, a shift that puts us next to the 12th hour where we will eventually emerge. In the depths of the darkest hours of our night journey, a hint of our eventual rebirth is thus obtained. And this is yet another union of opposites, restriction and freedom. Another hint is seen by the replacing of Atum as a leader with Kefra, the god of self-transformation, who is shown emerging from the tomb mound. All the gods and goddesses join in hauling on the ropes that pull the solar bark in order to traverse this narrow passageway in the middle of the region. The work is performed under the watchful gaze of Isis, our protecting mother. 4 gods keep safe the king's 3 crowns, which he will need again, the red crown of the red crown of Lower Egypt, which is in the north, the white crown of Upper Egypt, which is in the south, and the double feather Atef crown that unites them. Here, too, we can see the uniting of dualities into a synthesis that emphasizes balance in all things. Below us is the lake of fire. It, too, unites dualities. To the righteous, it is a lake of life, where the dead draw cool, refreshing water, but to the wicked is a lake of everlasting burning, the depth of eternal torment. Where have we heard this one before? Put another way, the symbols here may be either deadly or revivifying, depending on your approach to them. Here at the fulcrum point, the knife's edge test of our will. Do we have the strength of will to transform the waters of death into the water of life? Bless the Maker and his water. Bless the coming and going of him. May his passage cleanse the world. May he keep the world for his people. Entering the 6th hour, we reach the depths of the Netherworld. Before us, we see a vast abyss where primeval waters lie. By the way, the blank space there and in other photographs are doorways. They're not part of the book. Here, we must be reunited with all of our parts. The body, the ba or soul, the chaibit or shadow, the ren or name, the ka or vital spark, the ach or body of light, ku, in Crowley's translation, working from Budge, it means the magically effective one. We are approaching the midpoint of our night journey. After the place where opposites are reconciled, as part of the process of the alchemical putrefactio, the breaking down, or the Solvay half of Baphomet's formula, the God King begins the process of coagula, a reintegration. This regeneration is symbolized by the birds of the solar disk from Sobek, the birth of the solar disk from Sobek, the primeval crocodile god of chaos, swimmer in the vasty deep of the waters of the Nun. Tahuti, god of wisdom and intelligence, gives an offering to the goddess who bears Re's eyes, that he may be guided with his eyes to his fields and return once more to his fertile homeland. Here, too, are the God King's worthy predecessors, all of the former kings of Egypt and upper and lower. He addresses them, reminding them of the offerings that he has given to them. By connecting with the historical continuity of the land and its rulers, he proves himself worthy to rule in his turn. After all, this is a culture that has already several thousand years of history by the time this book was written, and that was 3,500 years ago. All have come together to aid in this reintegration. The gods and goddesses, the kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, the lion-headed bull of thunderous voice. In the Hetemet, or place of destruction, the individual components of error and wrongdoing are burnt away. In this place of ultimate darkness, the purifying fire consumes and transforms being into non-being and then into new being. The heads of the enemies are struck off and we are made whole. Our atonement, our at-one-ment, is truly beginning to manifest. In this region, we are shown the God King's corpse. He lies on his back, Khepra at his head. He is protected by a snake. Although shown here with many heads, the snake's name is tail in mouth. Thus it is a form of the Ouroboros serpent of eternity. As Eliphas Levi said, I have omnipotence at my command and eternity at my disposal. Here, at the very nadir of our journey, the old king dies and is reborn. Our old way of life dies and is replaced with new. The light that was extinguished is now rekindled. We see this not only in the several depictions of Khepra, but also in the regaining of the eyes, the organs that let the light into and out from the soul. The old sun that sank in the west is dead. The new sun that will arise in the east is in the process of being reborn. The person we used to be is no more. The person we will to become is in the process of being formed. But we are not yet that person, and if we fail now, we will fall into the very pit of failure. Arriving at the 7th hour, we are renewed, but we are still vulnerable, like a newborn babe. We shine once again, self-luminous, but as yet still weakly. Apophis, or Apep, the great enemy, attempts once again to stop our passage, to halt the process of willed evolution. He drains the river of life upon which our bark journeys, creates a sandbar upon which we run aground. Nevertheless, the God King sails by the magic of Isis and the eldest sorcerer, and by the magical power which is in the mouth of the great God himself. We must keep our word to ourselves, that we will see this process through and emerge victorious. Perdurabo, I shall endure unto the end. As Obtin Horning put it, the rekindling and self-regeneration of the young light is a moment of great danger. Therefore, we now encounter all the powers of evil that try to bring the course of the sun, and thus of the existence of the cosmos and ourselves to an end, to prevent any further progress of the light, to repeat the murder of Osiris. 2,000 years later, this trope will be recalled in the tale of Herod searching for the Christ child. In this hour, the combat against the forces of dispersion comes to a head, shown by a magical and physical battle between the gods and the destroyer, Apophis. He is described as having a terrible face without ears, full of fiery rage and making a roaring sound. It is perhaps not too much of a stretch to describe him as being the personification of failure himself. We see his echo in contemporary adversaries like the Pale Man of Pan's Labyrinth and, of course, in Voldemort. Isis and Set, the latter described as the eldest sorcerer, put a binding spell on Apophis, and the scorpion goddess Selket binds him with chains as the other gods gather to hack him into pieces. The great god passes along in this place, on the path of the cavern of Alsar, being elevated by the magic of Alset and the eldest sorcerer to turn away horrible face. This magic of Alset and the eldest sorcerer is enacted to ward off Apep from Re in the west in the secrecy of the Netherworld. It is performed likewise on earth. Who performs it is present in the bark of Re, in heaven and in earth. It requires little to know this. He who knows it not cannot repel horrible face. Meanwhile, the God King has been building up his protective aura, symbolized by an enveloping Mehen serpent. It will remain with him through the rest of his journey. Note again how a symbol, in this case the serpent, can stand for either a benign or a threatening force. Thus protected, the God King sees his would-be assassins vanquished. Bound before him, they are decapitated. The power of our will to persevere through the ordeals will see us through if we hold fast to it, reinforce it until it becomes second nature. Any doubts, any portions of ourselves that would cause us to swerve from the path of self-transformation must be ruthlessly discarded. The starry company of heaven witness this justice being done. Some things must be rooted out if righteousness is to prevail. Them that seek to entrap thee, to overthrow thee, them attack without pity or quarter. Destroy them utterly. Swift as a trodden serpent, turn and strike. In the 8th hour, we must pass through 5 caverns, where the deities robust with divine vestments of righteousness in pure white linen. We pass from one to the next, endowed with the password of life. As we call it out, sound returns to the land once silent. Cries of animals, sounds of nature, of daily life are heard once again. The work becomes easier, but it's too soon to become complacent. Although the land is still barren, the bark is once again being towed by the assembled deities. Apophis has been defeated, but threatening forces still linger, so the God King is continuously guarded by the gods and goddesses who have heard his call. At this point, we continue to reinforce our new way of being, remaining on guard into any lapses into old bad habits, toying with old sweetnesses. It is in this hour that the deceased, who are not dead but rather in the process of transformation, receive new raiments. The God King is robed in new apparel brought by a priestess whose name is given simply as the Virgin. In the 4th hour, the king had called upon his companions but received no answer. Here in the 8th hour, the power of the word has reestablished the connection with all the forces of nature, animal, human, and divine. In answer to his call, their response is likewise heard. Bird songs, murmuring of innumerable bees, the bellowing of cattle, the clang of metal being worked. Though cacophonous to our ears, the God King understands all these as speech. To the transformed one, everything that happens may be the voice of the divine, encouraging us toward our goal. In the 9th hour, we are introduced to the ship's company, the starry deities who sail our bark and protect us. We are nourished with meat and drink, and watch as our vanquished enemies are judged and sent to perdition. In this hour, we move to the eastern wall. Renewal is approaching completion. The crew of divine oarsmen are shown arriving with offerings of beef, beer, and bread. Others bring stalks of grain. They cause all the trees and plants to be created. Our work has begun to flower, to show positive results. Note, too, that these are not the wild fruits and game of the Neolithic nomadic hunter-gatherer. These are the cultivated foods of the civilized city dweller. They were so important to the ancient Sumerians that beer and bread became both a blessing and a greeting, like saying, "Have a good day." So now you don't have to say hello. You don't even have to say 93. You can just say beer and bread. All energies are now focused on this regeneration. Even the names of the oarsmen reflect this. The one who knows no obstruction, the one who knows no turning back. They too will endure until the end of the journey. As it is written, go on in my strength, and ye shall turn not back for any. Arriving at the 10th hour, we begin to pick up momentum. We pass through living waters and see the blessed souls therein. Above us is the restored eye of Horus. We are accompanied by the circle of gods and escorted by a company of warriors, fellow soldiers. No longer are we in the parching desert. The region shows the life-giving waters of the Nun have returned. Here, too, the eyes of the sun, protected and preserved through the darkest hours of tribulation, are returned to the God King, brought by a collection of gods led by Jehuti and lion-headed Sekhmet. The God King's entourage is here as well. They bear arms to protect him in his way of going, bows, arrows, spears. We also see redemption for those who died innocent. Their bodies are shown floating in the waters of return to be rescued by Horus and eventually reborn in a new incarnation. As for us upon the way, the great work has become easier. In the 11th hour, preparations are being made for the emergence from the eastern mountain of heaven. We see the great serpent of time who envelops the world, within whose circle the miracle of rejuvenation will soon take place. Auset and Nebhet, Isis and Nephthys, carry the crowns of the two kingdoms to the eastern gate, which is protected by Neith. Also known as Nit or Net, she is a war goddess, as well as sometimes considered the personification of the waters of creation. She is also the mediator in the dispute between Horus and Set. Thus, she is a reconciler of dualities. And we are the master of time. Our enemies have been judged and fallen into the pit of fire. We are ready, and at the appropriate moment we shall go forth. Having vanquished death, and having had his physical and magical powers restored, the God King is now ready to begin restoring his cosmic powers as well. In this hour, not just his normal eyesight, but his mastery of space and time, symbolized here by the paired Ujat eyes, are restored to him. The regeneration of the God King as the reborn sun is almost complete. At the head of the bark, we see the solar disk. In the next and final hour, it will be fully restored to him, appearing on his head, but for now it is enough that potentiality has returned. Another preparation for the final stage also appears in this hour. We see the great meridian, the world encircler, from whose body the sun will soon be given birth, being carried by 12 gods. The enemies meet their final judgment, cast into fiery pits, as Horus calls down, punishment for your corpses, annihilation for your souls, trampling down for your shadows, severing for your heads. You will not rise. You cannot escape. You cannot evade. All the treacherous elements have been cut away, burned off. Only the highest may remain and endure. Hold on. Can you guys still hear me? Because my computer has frozen.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Loud
Okay.
and clear.
Okay, hold on a second, because my computer just froze.
What a great night for technology.
All right, here we go.
All right.
It had to stop and think. Okay. Back up one. There we go. Finally, we have come to the 12th hour. The new birth of the sun will take place here. It is a repetition of the very act of creation itself. All the primeval deities are in attendance. It takes place within the coil of the world encircling serpent of time. In the bark with us are all the millions of righteous, reborn with us. They enter in as old people and emerge as babes. We have arrived near the end of our journey. We have survived the night. Dawn is coming. The sun god, fully restored to power, the solar disk and Uraeus serpents his crown, is ready for the final transformation. The world encircler, here called Life of the Gods, is in waiting for the landing of the solar bark. The millions of gods will enter at his tail, traverse up his spinal column, Kundalini anyone? And emerge from his head reborn. Thus, this night journey is a microcosm of the great regeneration of the universe. Both are encoded in this image of the great serpent of eternity. The 12 gods, previously shown as the 12 oarsmen in the 9th hour, 12 defenders in the 10th, and 12 serpent bearers in the 11th, are here joined by 13 goddesses. Together, they pull the god's bark to the shore, ready for his emergence. At the end of the hour, the solar beetle soars upward into the arms of Shu, god of the air, who raises the new sun into the sky. All the gods cheer and greet us. The passage behind us is sealed once more. The night journey is complete. A new day has begun. Unneeded, his mummy remains behind. The dross of the old self has been discarded. The reborn one hath parted from the darkling crowds, hath joined the dwellers of the light, opening Duat the star abodes, their keys receiving. The dead man hath made his passage into night, his pleasure on the earth to do among the living. Whoever knows these mysterious images is a well-provided spirit. Always this person can enter and leave the netherworld, always able to speak to the living ones. This is proven to be true, a millionfold. Whether read as a mythical journey of the Egyptian sun god, funerary text for the protection of long-vanished peoples, magical grimoire on traveling in the astral body, psychological advice on confronting and integrating the varied portions of our own souls, the Amduat speaks to us as it did to others all those long, dusty years ago. May we all find regeneration to live again in the sun. Thank you. Okay, now